There is a dangerous lie that society keeps repeating, and people believe it because it sounds comfortable. The lie is this: as long as you have money in the bank, you are safe. History has embarrassed that idea again and again. Entire nations once believed their currency was untouchable. Families thought their savings would protect them forever. Workers believed their paychecks would always cover tomorrow. Then inflation came like a silent fire. Prices climbed. Purchasing power collapsed. And suddenly people realized the paper they trusted could no longer buy the life they once had. You must understand something about money. Paper currency only works because people believe in it. The moment confidence weakens, the value begins to disappear. Governments print more. Debt grows larger. Prices rise faster than salaries. And ordinary people become trapped in a race they cannot win because every month their money buys less than it did before. That is why history keeps teaching one lesson to every generation willing to listen. Own things that hold value beyond paper. Real assets survive because they serve human needs. Land feeds people. Gold preserves wealth. Businesses solve problems. Skills create income no matter what economy exists around you. These things are not built on promises. They are built on usefulness. And usefulness always has value. Look at every economic collapse throughout history. During inflation crises, the people who survived best were not the ones holding stacks of cash. They were the people who owned farms, tools, resources, trade skills, equipment, and assets connected to survival and production. Because when fear spreads through an economy, people stop caring about status symbols. They start caring about necessities. Food matters, water matters, energy matters, shelter matters, security matters, knowledge matters. The person who can provide these things becomes valuable no matter what happens to the currency. Most people are trapped in the illusion of consumption. They spend their lives buying liabilities while believing they are building wealth. Bigger phones, bigger cars, designer labels, temporary pleasure. But none of those things protect you when purchasing power collapses. None of those things create freedom. Real wealth is ownership. Ownership changes everything. Ownership means you are not completely dependent on the system remaining stable forever. You cannot control inflation. You cannot control governments. You cannot control global markets. But you can control what you build, what you learn, and what you own. That is where power begins. The strongest position is not having the biggest paycheck. The strongest position is owning assets that continue working even when the economy becomes unstable. And let me tell you something else. Skills are one of the most powerful assets on earth because nobody can print more of your discipline, your experience, your ability to solve problems, or your knowledge. A person with valuable skills can rebuild. A person with only money can lose everything overnight. Learn skills connected to communication, technology, sales, leadership, repair, farming, investing, construction, and problem solving, because these abilities hold value in every economy and every generation. History rewards the prepared. It always has. While the average person laughs during the warning signs, smart people quietly position themselves. They study patterns. They understand cycles. They know that economic comfort can disappear faster than people imagine. And instead of panicking when prices rise, they build ownership before the crisis becomes obvious. The greatest mistake people make is assuming stability is permanent. Every empire in history believed it would last forever. Every generation thought collapse could never happen to them. Yet history keeps repeating the same lesson with different names and different countries. Currency weakens, debt rises, inflation spreads, the middle class suffers, and the people who prepared early gain strength while everyone else struggles to survive the shock. You do not need fear to prepare. You need awareness. Awareness creates discipline. Discipline creates action. And action creates protection. Start shifting your thinking from temporary comfort to lasting value. Ask yourself whether what you are buying today will still matter 5 years from now if the economy becomes difficult. Ask yourself whether your money is sitting still while inflation quietly destroys its power every single year. Because at the end of the day, money itself is not wealth. Ownership is wealth. Knowledge is wealth. Production is wealth. Resources are wealth. The people who understand this early stop chasing appearances and start building foundations. They stop trying to look rich and start trying to become resilient. And resilience becomes priceless when the world begins to shake. Most people wait too long. They wait for certainty. They wait for permission. They wait for headlines to confirm what history already warned them about. And by the time they finally move, prices are already higher, opportunities are already smaller, and fear has already taken control of the crowd. That is the difference between the poor mindset and the prepared mindset. One reacts late, the other moves early. History has never rewarded the people who waited for comfort before taking action. Every major financial shift, every economic collapse, every inflation crisis followed the same pattern. First came the warnings, quiet signs, rising debt, increasing prices, growing instability, but most people ignored it because life still felt normal. Then came the panic. Suddenly, everybody rushed at the same time, trying to protect themselves after the damage had already begun. The shelves emptied, markets changed, costs exploded, and the people who moved early were already positioned while everyone else was struggling to catch up. Preparation is not panic. Preparation is wisdom. Weak people laugh at preparation because they confuse readiness with fear. But the strongest people in history always prepared before the storm arrived. Farmers prepare before winter. Soldiers prepare before battle. Leaders prepare before crisis. Smart people understand that waiting until the emergency becomes obvious is already too late. The average person spends most of life reacting emotionally to whatever happens around them. When the economy looks strong, they become careless. When prices rise, they become fearful. When everybody else panics, they panic too. Their decisions are controlled by emotions instead of vision. But disciplined people do something different. They study patterns. They pay attention to history. They recognize warning signs before the crowd notices them. And because they move early, they gain advantages that emotional people never see. Think about this. When inflation begins rising, most people continue wasting money on distractions because they assume things will eventually go back to normal. They keep spending recklessly. They keep delaying investments. They keep telling themselves they have time. But prepared people understand that time is the most valuable advantage they have. So while others hesitate, they start buying assets. They start building emergency savings. They start developing skills. They start creating multiple income streams. They start preparing while preparation is still affordable. That is one of the greatest truths about life. Preparation is always cheaper before the crisis arrives. Once fear spreads through society, everything becomes expensive. Opportunities shrink because everybody suddenly wants the same protection at the same time. The people who ignored the warnings begin fighting for survival while the prepared remain calm because they already positioned themselves before the chaos started. And let me tell you something powerful. The crowd is almost always late. The crowd waits for proof. The crowd waits until everybody else agrees. But by the time the crowd sees the opportunity, the advantage is already disappearing. That is why successful people think differently. They understand that leadership requires moving before it feels comfortable. Most people want guarantees before they act. But history never gives guarantees. It gives clues. It gives patterns. It gives warnings. And those who pay attention gain the ability to move before disaster becomes obvious. Look at every financial crisis. There were always signs before the collapse. Rising debt, unsustainable systems, overconfidence, reckless spending, artificial growth. But people ignored the signals because denial feels safer than responsibility. The prepared mindset requires discipline because it often means acting while others mock you. It means saving while others overspend. It means investing while others hesitate. It means building while others complain. It means studying while others are distracted. And at first, disciplined people may look extreme to the average person. But when hard times arrive, discipline suddenly looks like wisdom. You cannot build strength at the last second. You cannot suddenly become financially disciplined when the crisis is already destroying your income. You cannot suddenly learn valuable skills when desperation has already taken over. Preparation must happen before pressure arrives. That is why winners focus on building during times of comfort instead of wasting comfortable seasons pretending difficult days can never come. The dangerous thing about modern society is that it trains people to chase convenience instead of readiness. People are addicted to instant pleasure, instant entertainment, instant spending, instant comfort. But comfort has weakened many people mentally and financially. They live without margins, without savings, without backup plans, without ownership, without skills that can survive hard economies. And because of that, even small economic pressure becomes devastating. Prepared people think long-term. They understand that life moves in cycles. Economies rise and fall. Markets expand and contract. Strong seasons are followed by difficult seasons. And instead of being surprised every time hardship appears, they position themselves ahead of time. They build habits that create stability before instability ever arrives. There is also a deeper truth here. Moving early is not only about money, it is about mindset. The prepared person develops the ability to act without waiting for everybody else to understand. That mindset creates confidence. It creates independence. It creates resilience. Because once you stop depending on the crowd for validation, you begin making decisions based on wisdom instead of public opinion. Most people lose because they spend their entire lives following trends instead of following principles. They buy when everybody is excited. They panic when everybody is afraid. Their entire financial life is controlled by emotion. But disciplined people understand something the crowd never learns. Success often requires moving before the majority feels comfortable moving. The people who survive economic storms are usually not the smartest people in the room. They are the most prepared. They are the ones who respected the warnings early enough to act. They understood that waiting for certainty is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. Most people have been programmed to consume from the moment they wake up until the moment they fall asleep. Every advertisement, every trend, every social media post pushes the same message. Buy more, show more, spend more, impress more. Society has trained people to believe that looking successful is more important than becoming secure. And because of that mindset, millions of people are trapped in financial weakness while pretending to live in strength. The consumer mindset is dangerous because it focuses only on today's pleasure and ignores tomorrow's reality. Consumers spend money to escape boredom. They buy things they do not need to impress people who do not truly care. They chase temporary excitement while ignoring long-term survival. Every paycheck disappears into liabilities, subscriptions, trends, entertainment, and status symbols. Then when economic pressure arrives, they panic because they built a lifestyle instead of a foundation. A survivor thinks differently. A survivor asks a different question before spending money. The average consumer asks, "Will this make me feel good right now?" The survivor asks, "Will this still matter if times become difficult?" That single shift in thinking changes everything, because history teaches one brutal lesson over and over again. Hard times expose weak priorities. During economic crises, expensive watches lose importance. Designer brands lose importance. Luxury image loses importance. People return to what actually matters. Food matters, water matters, shelter matters, health matters, skills matter, income matters, community matters, stability matters, and the people who built their lives around those priorities are the ones who stand stronger when the pressure increases. The system profits from keeping people distracted. Distracted people spend emotionally. They buy out of insecurity. They compare themselves constantly. They measure success by appearances instead of ownership. And that mindset creates financial slavery because consumers always need more money to maintain the image they created. They become trapped, working harder just to sustain temporary lifestyles that never truly satisfy them. Survivors refuse to play that game. They understand that freedom matters more than appearance. They understand that financial peace is more valuable than public approval. That is why disciplined people often look different from the crowd. While others waste money showing wealth, survivors quietly build it. While others chase attention, survivors chase stability. While others spend to impress strangers, survivors invest to protect their future. One of the greatest traps in modern culture is the addiction to comfort. People spend massive amounts of money making life easier, softer, and more entertaining while becoming weaker mentally and financially. They avoid sacrifice. They avoid discipline. They avoid delayed gratification. But survival has always required discipline. Every strong generation in history understood sacrifice. They understood preparation. They understood that comfort without stability eventually becomes dangerous. A survivor learns how to control desires instead of being controlled by them. That takes strength because modern society constantly tells people to indulge every impulse immediately. Buy now, upgrade now, finance now, consume now. But every unnecessary purchase steals resources from your future. Every emotional spending habit weakens your ability to prepare for difficult seasons. And let me tell you something important. Survival is not only about protecting yourself during crisis. It is about building independence before crisis ever comes. The consumer becomes dependent on systems remaining perfect forever. The survivor builds options. Savings create options. Skills create options. Investments create options. Ownership creates options. Multiple income streams create options. And when uncertainty enters the world, the person with options has power. Look at how fragile many people have become financially. One unexpected expense destroys them. One job loss creates panic. One inflation spike changes their entire life. Why? Because consumption replaced preparation. They spent years building lifestyles without building resilience. And resilience is what separates those who collapse under pressure from those who remain steady during chaos. Survivors think long-term. They understand that money is a tool, not a toy. Every dollar can either strengthen your future or weaken it depending on how you use it. Consumers buy liabilities that drain them. Survivors buy assets that support them. Consumers focus on image. Survivors focus on function. Consumers chase comfort. Survivors build strength. This mindset requires emotional discipline because many people spend money trying to heal internal emptiness. They shop to escape stress. They consume to avoid insecurity. They use material things to create temporary confidence. But no amount of consumption can replace purpose, wisdom, or self-control. In fact, uncontrolled spending often creates deeper anxiety because debt and instability eventually catch up with every undisciplined habit. The strongest people are not always the people making the most money. Often, the strongest people are the ones who learned how to live below their means while building above their circumstances. They understand patience. They understand sacrifice. They understand that real wealth grows quietly before it becomes visible. And history rewards those people. Every economic downturn creates two groups. One group becomes desperate because they depended entirely on comfort and consumption. The other group adapts because they trained themselves to think differently long before the crisis arrived. They built practical habits. They developed useful skills. They invested in things that hold value. They prepared mentally for uncertainty instead of pretending uncertainty could never happen. A survivor never assumes easy times will last forever. That mindset creates awareness. Awareness creates discipline, and discipline creates endurance. Because when the world becomes unstable, the people who survive best are usually the ones who learned how to control themselves before they ever had to control a crisis. Every generation believes it is different. Every society convinces itself that the disasters of history belong only to the past. People study collapsed economies, failed empires, inflation crises, and financial panics like they are ancient stories disconnected from modern life. They look at history with confidence and say, that could never happen here. But history has a dangerous habit of humbling people who ignore its warnings. The details may change, the technology may improve, the leaders may have different names, but human behavior remains the same. Greed remains the same. Fear remains the same. Pride remains the same. Denial remains the same. And because human nature does not change, the patterns of history continue repeating in different forms. Before every major collapse, there were always people warning others to pay attention. There were always signs that something was unstable. Debt expanded too fast. Prices rose beyond reason. Governments overspent. Citizens became addicted to comfort. Wealth gaps widened. People borrowed more than they could repay. But most ignored the warnings because life still looked normal on the surface. That is the dangerous thing about decline. It rarely arrives all at once. It happens slowly at first, quietly, gradually, small changes that people dismiss because they seem manageable. A little more inflation, a little more debt, a little more instability, a little less purchasing power. And because the collapse is not immediate, people become comfortable adapting to the warning signs instead of confronting them. History shows this pattern again and again. Nations once believed their currencies were invincible until inflation destroyed savings. Families once thought stable jobs would last forever until economies shifted overnight. Entire populations trusted systems that eventually failed them. Not because collapse was impossible, but because people assumed modern society was somehow immune to the laws that destroyed previous civilizations. One of the greatest weaknesses of humanity is short memory. People forget pain once comfort returns. After every crisis, discipline slowly disappears. New generations grow up without understanding the sacrifices previous generations endured. Easy living creates overconfidence. Overconfidence creates carelessness, and carelessness opens the door to repeated mistakes. Look at history closely and you will notice something powerful. Collapse usually follows periods of excess. Excessive spending, excessive pride, excessive dependence. Excessive confidence that prosperity will continue forever. People stop preparing because comfort makes them believe preparation is unnecessary. They stop valuing discipline because abundance makes discipline feel old-fashioned. And slowly, society becomes weaker while still appearing strong from the outside. That is why history matters. Not because it repeats word for word, but because it reveals patterns of human behavior that never truly disappear. History warns us what happens when nations abandon responsibility. It warns us what happens when debt grows faster than production. It warns us what happens when people value appearance more than stability. It warns us what happens when citizens depend completely on systems they do not control. And the people who survive difficult times are usually the people who respect those warnings early. They understand that wisdom means learning from other people's mistakes before you are forced to experience the consequences yourself. Fools wait until pain becomes personal before they change. Wise people study the past and prepare before the pressure arrives. Modern society often mocks preparation because people have become addicted to convenience. They assume supermarkets will always stay full. Banks will always remain stable. Jobs will always exist. Technology will always function smoothly. But history reminds us that stability is fragile. Entire systems can shift faster than people imagine. And when they do, unprepared people suffer the most. There is also another lesson history teaches. During crisis, character matters more than comfort. Hard times expose what people truly believe. They reveal who built strength and who only built appearance. When economies shake, disciplined people adapt faster because discipline trained them before the pressure came. People with strong values, useful skills, and resilient mindsets continue moving forward while others collapse emotionally under fear. History also warns us about dependence. The more dependent people become on fragile systems, the more vulnerable they become when those systems fail. That is why ownership matters. Skills matter. Community matters. Self-control matters. Preparation creates resilience because resilient people are not completely destroyed when circumstances suddenly change. Most people only pay attention after panic begins. That is why crowds are usually late. By the time fear reaches the headlines, smart people have already been preparing for years. They understood that warning signs should never be ignored simply because disaster has not arrived yet. And here is what makes history so dangerous to ignore. People often believe progress has removed risk. They think technology, modern banking, powerful governments, or advanced economies have somehow eliminated the possibility of financial hardship. But history proves that no nation, no empire, and no system is too advanced to face decline when discipline disappears and arrogance replaces wisdom. Prepared people do not study history to become fearful. They study history to become aware. Awareness sharpens decisions. Awareness creates urgency. Awareness teaches humility because history reminds us how quickly conditions can change. One generation can build prosperity while the next generation wastes it through complacency and short-term thinking. The strongest people are those who understand that the future belongs to those who prepare before the crowd wakes up. They do not assume tomorrow will automatically resemble today. They stay alert. They stay disciplined. They continue building skills, assets, and resilience because they understand that history does not need to repeat exactly to produce the same consequences for people who ignore its warnings.